أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So this is our fifth lesson, and in our fifth lesson today we shall be covering what is known as the literature review. And this is also one of the most important areas when you are writing your project or when you're writing your thesis. So it's very important that you understand this part so that you can be able to write your research effectively and efficiently. Now, so the lesson objectives are, by the end of this lesson, learners will be able to do what? Number one, understand the concepts, types, and process of conducting a literature review. Number two, comprehend the definition, importance, and types of research gaps. Then lastly, be equipped with the skills to identify gaps in existing literature and justify the need for new research. So these will be our lesson objectives. Now let us start. So in the beginning, we are starting with the definition as usual. So what is a literature review? So a literature review is a comprehensive survey of existing research and publications related to your topic. So when we are talking about literature review, it is all about you comprehensively reviewing existing research and publication related to your research or related to your topic. So for example, if your research is about the effect of maybe employee motivation on their performance, so when your literature review will revolve around articles, journals that are related to what? To motivation, employee motivation, and literatures that are related to employee performance. So this is very important basically. Now, what are the purposes of this literature review? So why are we doing this literature review? It serves several purposes. Number one, provides context and background for your research. Number two, identify key theories, concepts, and methodologies used in the field. Number three, highlight gaps or inconsistency in existing research. Then lastly, justifies the need for your study. So these are the purposes of literature review. These are the reasons why we normally do what? Why we need to review the literature. So number one, when you review the literature, you get to know the context of your study. You get to know the background related to your study. Number two, when you're doing a thorough literature review, you are also going to come across theories, because each and every research is underpinned under some theories. So when you are reviewing your literature, you have to review the theories that other researchers used, for example, in analyzing the same research topic you are writing. What are the methodologies they use? Then also it helps us to highlight the gaps, as we shall see later. Then it also justifies the need for your study. So when you do a thorough literature review, the end result, the net effect is that you're going to find a gap, and this gap is going to justify your study. Now, for example, an example of literature review. For example, if your research topic is the role of what? The role of Islamic banking in financial inclusion, this is how your literature review will look like. Number one, you will do what? You will review existing studies on Islamic banking and principles. So you'll go to the internet, see if there is any research or previous research related to Islamic banking and its principle. Then you'll also research on what? On financial inclusion and its importance. So basically what they're telling us, in your research topic, you normally have the independent variable and the dependent variable. So when you are doing a literature review, you have to review articles, you have to review past studies that are related to your, number one, independent variable, then number two, also your dependent variable. Then number three, studies that link Islamic banking to financial inclusion. You have to find studies that link Islamic banking to financial inclusion. Then gaps in the literature, such as limited research on Islamic banking in rural areas. So you need to find the gaps after a thorough literature review. Now, this is very important, the next part. The next part is about the types of literature review. So you've been writing your thesis, I know, and I know some of you have already reviewed the literature. But have you asked yourself, what kind of literature were you reviewing? What typology were you did you adapt when you were reviewing your what? Your literature. So number one, there is what is known as narrative literature review. So this narrative literature review, it provides a broad overview of the topic. And it summarizes and discusses key findings from existing studies. So for example, a narrative review of Islamic banking might discuss its growth. How did the Islamic bank grow? The principles of Islamic banks, and what are the challenges that Islamic banks have been facing. So when you are doing a narrative literature review, this is what it will look like, or this is how it will go about. Number two, we normally have the systematic literature review. So systematic literature review, it follows a structured and rigorous process to identify, evaluate, and synthesize all relevant studies. And it is often used in evidence-based research. When you are writing a research that requires you to provide some facts, some statistics, then it is good to you to do this systematic literature review. So it is very rigorous. Rigorous meaning it is very thorough. For example, a systematic review of studies on the impact of Islamic microfinance on what? On poverty alleviation. So in this case, we are going to rigorously review all the studies related to what? To Islamic microfinance on poverty alleviation. Now, number three, there is what is known as meta-analysis review, literature review. So this is a statistical analysis of data from multiple studies to identify what? So the main objective of this literature review is to identify if there is any pattern or a trend. So for example, a meta-analysis of studies comparing the profitability of Islamic and conventional banks. So here you basically want to identify, is there a trend? So for example, is it a negative trend? Is it a positive trend? Is it a correlated trend? Is it a regressive trend? So this is what you actually want to do what? To get behind your what? Behind your literature review. Number four, we have theoretical literature review. So this, from the name, it focuses on theories and conceptual framework related to the topic. And most of your researches and theses, they revolve around theoretical literature review. So for example, a review of theories explaining the ethical foundation of Islamic banking. So theoretical literature review, when you're writing your research, you have to review all the theories that are related to your study. And from all those theories, of course, you have to show us how these theories are related to your study. Then, at the end of the day, from the list of these theories, you need to choose one that you are going to use, that you are going to adopt in your study. Then we have methodological literature review. So this one examines the research method used in existing studies. For example, a review of methodologies used to measure customer satisfaction in Islamic banking. So here, when you are reviewing, you go to the internet, you read the journals, the articles, you review the methodology. The methodology that other researchers used when they were actually doing what? When they were actually analyzing or researching on the same area that you are also researching. Now, this is number 5 or 6, scoping review, scoping review. So this one provides a preliminary assessment of the size and scope of available literature, often used to identify research gaps or clarify what? Or to clarify key concepts. So when you're talking about scoping review, it normally helps us to know the size and scope of the available literature. It's all about the time scope, the geographical scope, ila ghairi dhalik. So once we analyze the scope and the size, we will find or realize that there are some gaps. Then lastly, we have critical literature review. So this one evaluates the strengths and weaknesses of existing research. Because in each and every research, you'll always find there is a strength. Maybe the strength is in the use of the word, the use of the methodologies. Maybe the strength is in the use of the philosophies. So each and every research will always have an area of strength. And the opposite is also true. Each and every research will also have some weaknesses. So when you are reviewing the literature, you have a table. This table helps you to review. You write the strength of this research and the weaknesses. Once you do that, then you will identify maybe the biases, the inconsistencies, or methodological flaws. Once you group your analysis into strengths and weaknesses, it is only then that you will identify the gaps. Now, what are the steps? What are the steps to do what? What are the steps to conduct literature review? So if you want to conduct an effective and a good literature review, then there are some processes that are involved. Number one, like we were saying yesterday, you need to define your research question. Because remember we said that the research question will guide you. The research question is your roadmap. So when you are reviewing the literature, remember, you are always looking for information to answer your research question. So that is why you are reviewing. You are reviewing. Why are you reviewing? Because we want some information to help us digest, to help us answer our research question. So define your research question, clearly articulate the topic or problem you are investigating. Your research question should be very clear. Your research problem should be very clear. If there is a problem in your research problem, then it is going to affect you in the literature review. You might end up actually reviewing literature that is not even related to your research problem. So break it down into key concepts or variables. Now, as we said that in your research, you have two parts, the independent variable and the dependent variable. And when you are doing a literature review, you have to review literature that is related to your IV, that is the independent variable, and the DV, dependable variable. Number two, once you do that, you can go to the next step. Search for relevant literature. So now you have to go to the internet, you have to go to the library, use academic database. For example, you have the Google Scholar, PubMed, GS, TOR. All these are database resources that can help you to find information or researches. Use keywords and Boolean operators to refine your search. So when you're doing, for example, if you want to get some research that is related to your topic, you should be very careful. For example, if you go to Google, you have to use some keywords in your IV, independent variable and dependable variable. That will help you when you're searching. Include a mix of books. So when you're doing the literature review, in your research, we need to find some books, we need to find some journal articles, we need to start to find some conference paper and gray literature. So what you are basically saying is that when you are writing your research, your references have to be diverse. But some students, you'll always find their research is only from books or maybe only journal articles. La, you need to have a mushakal of the what? Of the resources that you're using in your research. Then after that, evaluate and select sources. So you need to evaluate, assess the credibility, relevance, and quality of each source. Remember, not everything that you get from the internet is good. The internet is just like sometimes, it is like al-bahar. So the internet is like an ocean. So anybody can just drop anything. People are just uploading things there. So your responsibility is to objectively identify credible sources. Because if you don't do that, you will end up, unfortunately, using some sources that are not credible. Then number 4, organize the literature. Group sources by theme, methodologies, or chronological order. Chronological order means you have a beginning, a middle, and end, or introduction, body, and conclusion. That's the meaning of chronological. So once you need to organize the literature, for example, this literature, all this literature in your computer, you can just have a folder, many folders. So this folder, this one is related, for example, to employee performance. So all the books and articles related to employee performance, one folder. Another folder related to Islamic banking, all the books and resources. Another folder, so that is how you should be doing your research. Then after that, you identify the patterns, trends, and gap in the research. So now you will have reviewed. As you are reviewing all these sources, you might be noting down the gaps and the inconsistencies or trends in all this area. Then once you finish that, you analyze and synthesize, compare and contrast different studies. Of course, you're going to have many studies. You need to compare them, highlight key findings, debates, and unresolved questions, relate the literature to your research question. Then now write the review, structure the review logically. Thematic means you can write it based on themes, topic, this topic is related to this, or chronological, or according to the methodologies. Provide a critical analysis of the literature, not just a summary. Some students, when I'm reviewing their thesis, they just give you summaries of copy-paste from ChatGPT. They don't even do the literature review. They just go and copy-paste. And when you're defending your thesis, you will be asked. You're going to be asked questions by the panel about your literature review. So you need to know, how did you do your literature review? If you don't know how you did, if you don't know how you did the literature review, you might end up missing some marks. They will just tell you that you copied your. Ibrahim, I'm calling you back. I'm busy now. I cannot answer now. I'm busy. I'll check later. Okay, I'll check later. No problem. So, where are we? So you were talking about the importance of analyzing your literature review, and you need to know everything that is happening in your literature review. Then conclude by identifying gaps and explaining how your research will address them. So once you finish your literature review, you will find out that there are some gaps in the literature, and these gaps are what you are now going to fill. Your research is going to fill these gaps. So that is the importance of the literature review. For each and every literature review you do, you will always find there is a gap. Maybe there is a gap in the scope. For example, maybe this research was done maybe in Somaliland, but you are in Somali. So that is a gap. So this nobody has done this study, for example, in Somali. That is why you are doing it. Maybe there is the time gap, the years that the research was done, maybe the methodology. So there are a lot of gaps. Then you need to cite your sources. Use a consistent citation style. And in our case at Lincoln University, we normally use the APA style. You know, the APA style, this is the style that normally focuses on what? When you are doing the in citation, you write the name of the author and the year. The name, the author, the name and the year, the name and the year. The MLA normally focuses with the name of the author and the page. It does not focus with the year. So you'll always find, if you find the name and the page, that is the MLA citation style. Then the Chicago, it is always in the footnote down there. When you're at the end of the page, you find that they have written the word, the footnote, all the references are down there. So these are the three methods that you can adopt. But in our case, we normally use the APA. So what some students normally do is that you find there is no consistency because they are copy-pasting their research. So you find in chapter 1, somebody has used APA. Chapter 2, somebody is using MLA. Chapter 3, you're using Chicago. So you find that there is no consistency. And if you lack this consistency, you're going to lose a lot of marks. You know, so you have to be very careful when you're writing your research, because these are the things that we normally check. So you have to ensure that if it is APA, it is from chapter 1 to chapter 5. You've used the APA. And also at the end, the reference list at the end of your research, it also has to be APA. And also you have to ensure that the in citations, if you've used 50 of them, in the list of references, you should be having 50. So some students, they normally think they're very smart. What they do, you find that some citations normally miss in the list. So what we normally do is that we check every reference you've used. We check it in citation, and you also check if it is at the end of if it is in the reference list. If it's not there, then you lose some marks. So you have to be very careful with that. And in general, when you're structuring, the structure of a literature review has 3 parts. You basically have an introduction where you introduce the topic and its importance. You state the purpose and scope of the review. Then the body, organize the literature into themes, theories, or methodology. This is what you were just saying before. Then critically analyze and synthesize the findings. Then lastly, conclusion. Summarize the key insight from the literature. Identify gaps and explain your research, how your research will contribute. So here, basically, they're telling us, in the literature review, ensure that you review at least 10 to 15 studies that were done before, because it gives some substance and it gives some weight to your research. But some students, they will only review 2 researches that were written by previous researchers. No, the more studies, the more research you review, the more weight and the more substance you're going to get in your research. Now, these are the tips for writing a literature review. Number 1, always be critical. Don't just summarize. This is what I was just telling you. Evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of the studies. I don't want a summary. For example, if you're writing about, you are reviewing a research that was written by Mohammed Ishaq from Mogadishu University about the effect of employee training on their performance. So you have to evaluate all the things that Mohammed wrote in his research, the methodology that Mohammed used, his scope, How did he do the sampling? Everything about his research. You need to analyze everything in his research. Then you need to identify the gaps. Stay focused. Keep the review relevant to your research question. Sometimes some students, they normally go to unnecessary information. Remember, your research question should be the one that is guiding you. So you should be reviewing anything that is related to your research. Use clear language. Avoid jargon. Jargon means complex or technical language. And explain complex concepts. If there are complex concepts in your research, try to simplify them. Be objective. Present different perspectives fairly. So when you are reviewing the literature review, of course, you are going to get many views. Sometimes you might not agree with those views, but you just have to present it fairly. Don't have some biases. Then update regularly. Include the most recent and relevant studies. This is also very important when you're writing your research. There are some students, when they're writing their research, they are not using recent and relevant studies. What they do, they use some studies in 90s and in 80s and in 2001, 2002. Those studies, they are very old. We are in 2025. So if you want your research to have some good substance, if you want your research to be impactful, at least you should be using, your references should be between 2020 to around 2025, or at least the last 10 years, at least, but that is even still worse. So you need to ensure that you are using recent and relevant studies, because you cannot start reviewing a study that was done in 1980s, 1990s. You know, things have really changed. Theories have changed. Methodologies have changed. So we always look at your referencing, and if you've used updated studies or you are just copy-pasting stuff. Now, this is an example of literature. This is an example of literature review. For example, we have what? The topic is what? The impact of social media on mental health among adolescents. So if this is your topic, then how will you go about the literature review? So number one, you have to define the research question. So this is the research topic. Now from this research topic, what is the research question? How does social media use affect the mental health of adolescents? Now, that is your research question. Now, what do you have to search? Search for relevant studies using keywords like, so when you're reviewing the literature, any study that is related to social media, mental health, and adolescence. So these are the keywords that will help you to get what other people have written. Then number three, evaluate and select high quality peer-reviewed articles. This is what I was just saying, updated studies. Then organize the literature into themes. For example, the positive effects in one file, the negative effects in one file, moderating factors in one file. Then after that, analyze and synthesize the finding, highlighting gaps, such as lack of longitudinal studies. Then lastly, write the review, concluding that while social media can enhance connectivity, excessive use is linked to anxiety and depression. Now, this is also another example of synthesizing literature. So organizing and synthesizing literature involves categorizing, analyzing existing literature to identify trends, themes, and gaps. So what you normally do, you categorize by theme, group studies based on common themes, studies that are related, you put it in a folder. Then you have to summarize key findings, a brief summary of each study's main finding. For example, a study by Ahmed 2020. This is the APA style. You have the name, you have the year. found that Islamic banking products are more accessible to low income. So this is like a summary. You can also identify trends and patterns. For example, several studies highlight إلى غير ذلك. You can compare and contrast. While Han 2019 emphasizes the role of Islamic banking in poverty alleviation, Ali 2021 focuses on its limitation in rural areas. So if this is how you're going to write your research, then it is a research that it can even be published in international journals. So this is an example of literature review in Islamic banking. For example, several studies have explored the role of Islamic banking in promoting, for instance, Ahmed 2020, ila ghairi dhalika, Khan 2019, Ali. So you will review it during your free time. This is also another example, you know. So I just need you to focus with the wording, how they write the literature review, and the referencing, how they do the references. You know, you write the name and the year, the name and the year. Now, the last part is about the research gaps. So the research gap, what is a research gap? Research gaps refers to an area or topic within a field of study that has not been sufficiently explored, understood, or an underexplored issue that provides an opportunity for further investigation. Research gaps can arise due to sometimes there is limited studies, sometimes there is inconclusive findings, sometimes you find there is some new developments, new technologies, sometimes there is geographical or contextual limitation, or sometimes there is methodological issues. So these are the reasons for research gaps. Now, the most important thing is I need you to know these types of research. So when you're doing your literature review, sometimes you will find that there is knowledge gap, that not many people have written about your research. So there is a gap. So your research is going to fill the knowledge gap. Number two, methodological gaps. That is, there is a gap in methodology. So your research maybe is going to fill that gap. Maybe the other studies, they were using a qualitative methodology, but you are going to use a quantitative methodology. Then there can be a theoretical gap. So for example, there is lack of theoretical framework to explain a phenomenon. So your research is going to cover that gap. You are going to come with a new theory. Empirical gaps. Empirical gaps means contradictory finding in existing studies. So sometimes you find it is the same study, but some researchers, they find a positive effect. Some researchers, they find a negative effect. So what is happening here is that there is some contradiction. So you want to know, why is this contradiction happening? Then contextual gap, there is lack of research in a specific context or region. Maybe not many people have done a research maybe in one region, in a country, you know, or even in a topic, not many people have explored your topic. إلى غير ذلك. Now, these are examples, you will read it later, of the theoretical gap, empirical gap, we have contextual gap, إلى غير ذلك. So these are the types of what? These are the types of gaps that you can identify in a word, in a research. So when you do a literature review, you will come to a conclusion. And during your defense, you will be asked, you will be asked about the gaps. So which gaps are you filling in your research? What gaps? They might ask you what gaps, maybe. What gaps did you want? What gaps did you realize in your research? So is there any question? Is there any question as I check? There is a student who took the attendance yesterday. Can you please help me with the attendance? There is a student who took the attendance yesterday. Is there any question, please? Some students, they come late to class, they don't even benefit at all. They just come for the attendance. Any question? So, if there is no question, I'm almost through. Okay, if there is no question, we'll meet tomorrow, the same time at 8 o'clock, inshallah. Okay, thank you.